Okay, so in this video, I'll just go quickly over some of the theory for what UV unwrapping is. If you want to skip it because you understood the lesson, that's fine. But this kind of talks about it. So UV unwrapping, pretty much you guys know these things, right? Where maybe in elementary school or kindergarten, they gave you kind of like a piece of paper, you cut it up, and then you fold it and glue it into an actual 3D object. And so when we made the flower, right, we did the same thing, except we drew our image. So we drew the flowers here, and then we cut it up, and we formed a 3D object. So that's also kind of what almost UV unwrapping is. Or another way to think of it is like when you're sewing pants or anything. If you guys know anything about sewing, you first start with a plan, you cut out like little pieces, and then you stitch them together, and then you make actual pants. So really, we went from a 2D object, so a flat two-dimensional object, into a three-dimensional object. Essentially, that's the opposite of UV unwrapping. In UV unwrapping, we start with a 3D object, and then we cut it up and lay it flat onto a 2D image. So it's kind of like going from pants, taking all the sewing things out, and then laying all the pieces flat back down again. So the reason for this is, it's written here, if you can see it. The reason for it is in 3D, when you have a mesh in 3D, it's not optimal to tell for the computer to have all the coordinates of all the colors at every single point. But it is optimal if we can somehow transfer a 2D image onto a 3D object. So the way we do this is, say we create our object. So if this is a car, for example, our 3D object that we made, or like a mushroom, then what you first have to do is you have to go into edit mode, and you have to say, okay, this is where I want the cuts to be. So I want to cut an object up, and in 3D modeling, we say that is, we're marking the seams, just like seams in sewing. Then you can fold it out into, like, lay it flat, and this is the UV unwrapping. Then really the full pipeline would be, once we have this 2D image, we can create a material and texture in our shading tab. Then we can add some colors and things onto our 2D image, and then we package it back up into our 3D object. So you can see right here, I have like a face, and it transfers here. I have this happy face, it transfers down here. But you'll notice that this sad face, this blue sad face, because it's not anywhere on top of this island, it's still on the texture, but it's not overlapping any of this 3D object, then it doesn't show up anywhere. Okay, so I'm just gonna quickly show you exactly how to do this, right? So we have our cube, going to edit mode, I press number 2, or I make sure I select this edge select mode, and then I select an edge. So say I wanna cut this edge up, I only wanna mark seams of specific points. So I'm gonna select these two, for example, for a cube, these two for a cube. I wanna mark that as a seam. And if I select these two as well, mark seam. If I press A to select all, and then U to unwrap, and then I just hit unwrap. So this is what it's giving me, but it kind of it feels weird. And the reason for that is because if I had a cube in real life and all I did was cut there and here, and I tried to squash it, lay it down flat on a piece of paper, I wouldn't be able to. I still need to make one more cut right here. So I'm gonna mark seam right here, and then I'm gonna unwrap. Okay, and so now I get like a net. So this is the net that I have. And this kind of, if you remember from grade 8, when you talked about nets, this should become kind of familiar. Cool. When I have this net, if you wanted to add textures to it, I go into the shading tab, I create a new texture with the Node Wrangler add-on, Control T. I can create a new image texture. I'm just going to leave it 1024 by 1024. New image. And now I can go to texture paint. So with it selected, texture paint, I can start painting my cube. And you can see that it's painting that piece of paper almost, right? And it's kind of smart, like, so if I hit this position here, which is really here, this corner, it's actually going to paint all three of these things. Whereas if you just were to paint on the flat 2D image here, it would not paint. It would not continue right here. And then so in the next video, I'll do a little bit more complex example, which is the mushroom that we retopologized in the last section.